introducing any Fundum key staff to start the meeting?
Probably.
Yep. Well, especially since it needs a presentation. They didn't believe me when I said we were starting at 1, so we'll have to wait a couple more minutes. We have quorum, but I think we're still missing 1 or 2 staff members who are making the presentation. So. All right, mesdames et messieurs, si on recommence. So thank you once again. If my math is still with me, we have 2 items before us. The one which we expect to be considerably longest, energy evolution, item number 4. Which will start with the staff presentation, and then the final item will be the corporate electric vehicle charging station policy. So I believe, Mr. Willis, you are starting, and then Marika Clark and Mike maybe doing the bulk of the presentation. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here today to present the Energy Evolution Strategy, which is Ottawa's Community Energy Transition Strategy Phase 1. So I'm just going to do some introductory slides and then turn the presentation over to Marika Clark, who is the Program Manager for our Natural Systems and Resiliency part of our Long Range Planning and Economic Development Group. And then assisting us is Mike Fletcher from the BEAM Group, who's worked intimately with the project, and he's helping us as well. I'd also like to acknowledge that Joan Hayson from Leidos, Canada, who's the consultant on the project, is in the audience with us as well, and so she can assist us with questions on pathways if that's of any help to committee. So on to the next slide, please. So what is energy evolution? Energy evolution is a community energy transition strategy. It's a getting from here to there, where we're at today, to a future state that we hope, which will be a lower carbon future. And although this is a new term for some, it is, you know, the key words we talk about this is community, because it is done on a basis of what we do as a city, but what is done more broadly in the community. It's the energy and the transition to the lower carbon future. The word community reflects the community-oriented nature of the strategy. The plan includes both corporate or city-led components, as well as actions that can be pursued by partners within the community at large. Energy evolution establishes a framework for the city to work collaboratively with our partners to identify local energy priorities and advance joint solutions. And I think Janice Ashworth in her deputation earlier talked about the thousands of hours that have gone into this, and that's actually quite true. This has been an enormous collaborative effort with our community. When I also talk about other partners, I want to acknowledge that key partners for us in this strategy have been Hydro Ottawa and their team and the specialization that they bring, and also the federal government, who has come to the table recently with some very, very direct initiatives that will potentially advance the strategy forward. So the word energy indicates this plan is focused primarily on energy and how it will be consumed in various forms within the municipality. While there are many positive benefits, co-benefits to local energy initiatives ranging from local economic development to greenhouse gas reductions, an energy strategy looks at energy consumption trends, risks, and opportunities as the first point of departure. And you know, we do look at this both as improving our environmental condition in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also a very true economic development benefit when this region can internalize the supply chain of energy to retain the dollars spent in that investment within the local economy wherever we can. Finally, the term transition highlights the long-term nature of the strategy, addressing our dependence on imported energy, and this can't be achieved overnight, but that's why it's a roadmap to move forward. Energy evolution therefore recognizes the need to undertake new forms of short, medium, and long-term, long-range energy planning and the need to integrate these elements into a single vision for Ottawa. So the Phase 1 document, which is before you for approval today, is the first part of what's a two-part strategy. Should the strategy be approved, staff will begin undertaking the Phase 2 right away beginning in Q1 2018 and start implementing the Phase 1 right away. The rationale for dividing the strategy into two initial phases is a reflection of the complex and highly technical nature of the work and community energy planning. We still need a number of additional technical inputs in order to do the Phase 2 work, and these are the pathway studies that Marika will talk about later on. So the list of elements that will be included in Phase 1 and are planned for Phase 2 are outlined in the following two slides. As you can see, Phase 1, which is today's element, has the visions and objectives for the overall strategy, which we put together with the community partners, which will guide it. A baseline energy analysis, which I wished I'd been clear with Councillor Nussbaum earlier. It does meet the requirements for the baseline energy we need for various grants and program funding, and it's also part of our annual reporting, and which describes how much energy is consumed in Ottawa annually and where it goes to, what forms do it. And you'll see a very interesting slide on that shortly. It provides a thorough assessment of local renewable energy generation opportunities and constraints, and it identifies 33 actions to be undertaken by the city and/or community partners between 2017 and 2020. And as I said earlier today, 19 of those will begin in 2018 with the approval of the draft budget that's before Council. Phase 2, which is the next phase which we will begin working on, it will include the development of the remaining pathways for buildings, transportation, waste, and energy storage. Once complete, an energy modeling component to quantify to the best extent possible the potential impacts associated with different actions, initiatives on pathways will be completed, and it will add additional action items to us to be considered. And much of that information will be both corporate initiatives, it will feed into community partnerships and some of the programs you might seek grant funding for, and much of that information will be key inputs to the official plan renewal, which will happen in the next term of council. So that will lead to an assessment report which will prioritize efforts over the medium and long term and chart a pathway towards Ottawa's low carbon future that is powered by clean, renewable energy. And it will become a key tool for us to use in our partnering with the senior levels of government at the provincial and federal level on what we see as opportunities for reform and enhancement to the Ontario Building Code, the Planning Act, or other incentive systems that may be offered by the senior levels of government. The second phase will also talk about long-term governance of the strategy and how we measure and report on our progress and how the committee will continue to guide our actions on this. And as with Phase 1, Phase 2 of the project will include significant engagement component with community partners in the development of the strategy. We will continue to use the targeted sounding boards, which we feel have been very successful so far, where we bring subject matter experts from the community or business community. We saw examples today of representation, both community members and business community members who are very interested in seeing this project move forward. And we'll continue to consult with the Council's Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee and engage them in various steps of the process to ensure their advice and feedback is considered as the project moves forward. So the overall benefits for doing this is it will advance Ottawa's climate change and sustainability objectives, and this is a collective benefit to switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy over our economy more broadly in this region. And from an environmental perspective, this will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, which will help combat climate change, and it helps, and that has a collateral benefit to people's health. And if you look at this collectively, there are downstream positive health benefits that avoid spending in healthcare when we have a better environmental condition. From an economic perspective, this will cause a positive economic ripple to happen across our local economy. New green jobs in manufacturing, construction, and the trades are emerging, and Ottawa, Algonquin College, for example, is a really good example of a high degree of specialization in some of these skill sets. And the demand for skilled labor, for home retrofits, and renewable energy technologies will create new job opportunities for a wide range of people in our workforce. And upgrades could be in individual homes, could be adding insulation, building automation systems, replacing inefficient furnace systems with outdated technology with lower carbon sources. And as Marika will talk about, the role of distributed energy generation. Ontario's Climate Change Action Plan allocates $1.8 to $2.6 billion for improving energy efficiency and a further $45 to $70 million to support apprentices, skilled trades, and other building professions in developing green building skills. These have the potential to create in Ontario over 30,000 green jobs over the 5-year cycle of that plan, and we'd like to ensure that this is a sound and strong market for those skill sets, as well as a place where people can come to obtain them. We have a reputation for innovation, and Ottawa's already home to 240 clean tech companies, and that number is growing every single year. Energy, information, and technology are a key element of smart cities, and we talked at our previous FEDCO meeting about our smart city strategy, and energy evolution and smart cities are intimately interrelated. With potential applications ranging from smart grids and energy storage to automated electric vehicles and smart mobility systems, community energy planning can play a significant role in this initiative. The implementation of renewable energy technologies helps secure energy independence, and Ottawa's vast inexhaustible energy supply would be stable and allow for affordable energy prices, lower operating costs, and more reliable and resilient energy systems, driving innovation at the community level. From a quality of life perspective, the transition to renewable energy improves health, enables stable jobs and a viable economy, and demonstrates leadership in the meaningful role that Ottawa can be to demonstrate in the rest of Canada its efforts to address climate change and ensure resiliency for future generations. So with that context, I'd like to turn it over to Marika Clark, who will present to you the details of the strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. I guess moving on to the project itself, Energy Evolution is the 2015 to 2018 Term of Council strategic initiative that evolved from the Air Quality and Climate Change Management Plan in 2014. The direction for this project, as you can see above, was to complete a baseline analysis of energy supply and demand within the City of Ottawa and assess options in collaboration with community partners to advance renewable energy generation, energy conservation, and energy efficiency. In addition, in 2016, Council approved a target to reduce Ottawa's GHG emissions to 80% below 2012 levels as part of the Air Quality Climate Change Management Plan update. So these two deliverables, they work in tandem as one directly affects the other. As this is a community energy transition strategy, community partners have been integral to the success of the project, ranging from the development of a project vision to establishing goals, requirements for success, and contributing to working groups and the workshops, or being part of the larger sounding board. The 8 goals established by the sounding board for the project also drove the development of business cases, policies, and the collaborative actions of the project. The goals are important because they explain what is important to Ottawa and the sounding board at large, and where we need to go with energy evolution. And I'll just quickly outline what these eight goals are, because they really are the framework and foundation of the plan. And these are to help meet or exceed locally established energy reduction targets, develop local renewable energy generation opportunities, improved energy security for Ottawa, a greater opportunity for residents to own or invest in local energy systems and businesses, to overall reduce environmental impact, to complement long-term municipal land use, transportation, and infrastructure master plans, advance economic development objectives, and ultimately bring groups together to facilitate information sharing and the development of joint solutions. The vision for Ottawa's future is a thriving city powered by clean, renewable energy. Achieving this vision will require residents, businesses, organizations, and governments to make a sustained transition away from the current dependence on fossil fuels. And this will be done by reducing energy use through conservation and efficiency, increasing the supply of renewable energy through local and regional production, and prioritizing the procurement of clean, renewable energy. The development of the 33 actions in this plan are based on a baseline report and 9 renewable energy pathways. The baseline describes Ottawa's energy status to 2015. The pathways are effectively technical notes that include the description of the renewable energy technology, along with an assessment of its overall potential and the constraints that are likely to reduce its uptake in the region. They include solar power, wind, hydro power, biogas, heat pumps, district energy, and the electrification of transport, that is light vehicles. Energy evolution to date has focused on energy generation, but has also broached energy conservation and efficiency as we looked at thermal energy sources such as heat pumps and district energy. Now, I have a Sankey diagram up here. Some people love them, some people hate them, but I think it shows a good summary of our energy distribution as it sat in 2015. The baseline report that this came from tells us that Ottawa consumes 114 terajoules of energy annually. Only 5% of Ottawa's energy is locally generated renewable energy, and that comes through water power, biogas, and solar. So 95% comes from external sources. So as you can see from the slide above, most of our energy use is from using natural gas for heating and cooling, followed by electricity to power homes and businesses, and gasoline to power vehicles. Roughly a third of each of Ottawa's energy goes to residential, transportation, or a combination of industrial, commercial, or institutional uses, as you can see in the right-hand column. Of note, annual energy costs in Ottawa was about $3 billion in 2015. 83% of that was paid to entities outside of Ottawa. The pathways outline potential uptake and application of technology under conservative, moderate, and aggressive scenarios. Looking at all of the pathways together suggests that renewable energy technologies have the potential to offset close to half of Ottawa's current energy consumption if an aggressive scenario were taken. If you translate this into GHG reductions, it means that if Ottawa were to fully develop all of its potential to generate renewable energy, it can get to 48% of its 80% GHG reduction target. And that's if all the stars align. What does this mean for Ottawa? Renewable energy generation alone will not enable Ottawa's transition to becoming a city powered by clean renewable energy, nor will it achieve an 80% GHG reduction below 2012 levels by 2050. We need to rely more on reducing energy consumption. Completion of the Phase 2 pathway studies, modeling and analysis for energy efficiency and conservation for transportation, buildings, waste streams, and energy storage, together with the Phase 1 results, will help define an optimal scenario for Ottawa to achieve its GHG target and renewable energy objectives in the short, medium, and long term. It will also provide a roadmap for Ottawa's community partners to get us to our 2050 goals. That said, transition requires action and the tools to get us there. Armed with the baseline and 9 pathway documents, community partners as subject matter experts stepped up and workshopped with staff to develop value propositions and sort out opportunities and barriers to advance actions for renewable energy initiatives. And the result was 33 short-term actions that can be completed between 2017 and 2020. The 33 initiatives will be led by either the city or community partners or working together. The initiatives range, for example, from virtual net metering for energy generation to introducing district energy at high-density growth nodes and corridors and establishing an electric vehicle discovery center in Ottawa. All of the projects are explained more fully in the strategy and summarized in document 2 that we are asking you to support today. In 2016, one-time funding of $300,000 was granted by Council to pilot catalyst projects in 2017. These were intended to serve as demonstration projects or projects that can be scaled up. 7 were selected, and these projects will be used to increase energy literacy, pilot emerging technologies, and/or enable innovation. In Q1 2018, a summary report to this committee will summarize the lessons learned and outline the achievements and benefits of each, how they contributed to energy evolution, and how they could lend themselves to being scaled up in the future. Now this slide, it speaks to funding resources, but I think it's been spoken about enough this morning, so I won't speak too much about this. I should iterate, though, that the provincial and federal funding sources, there's a lot of them available, as you can see, just the ministries involved. There's a reason for that. It's recognized that municipalities have a face with the public, with businesses, more than any other group, and can affect change because of that closer relationship. The province and federal governments, they also have a target to reduce GHGs by 80% by 2050. So it's useful for them to engage municipalities to help them reach that goal. So it's mutually beneficial. So to conclude, we ask that the Environment and Climate Protection Committee recommend that Council receive Energy Evolution, Ottawa's Community Energy Transition Strategy, and direct staff to initiate the 33 actions summarized in Document 2. Also complete Phase 2 that will include the development of transportation, buildings, waste streams, and energy storage pathways in collaboration with the community partners, and provide a status report to Committee and Council by 2019. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Thank you very much. As is our usual procedure, we will go to delegations first. And we had 11 or so signed up. I am not sure if the later we've gone into the day, if we've lost some, but perhaps to give me an indication, I'll just do a call out of who is here, and you'll know where you are in order. Anthony Garofalo-Auger is still here. You may as well come up as your first up. Will be followed by Kim Smet, Sustainable Energy Ottawa, Ontario. Bill Egertson, is Bill still here? Stu Campagna, saw Stu earlier. Kara Stonehouse, Tucker House, thanks Kara. I wasn't sure if this was to speak or not. Wynette Smith? Not here, okay. Angela Keller-Herzog, again speaking on behalf of cafes. Roger Peters, Roger's here. Robert Walker, Burritt Rapids, there we are. Others were letters. We received a number of those, and then people who have signed up since we've come are Brian Mitchell, Paul Cairns, Trevor Hache, Joan Haysom, Joan's still here, and Felix Welfels. Right. Okay. All right. So that may take us up to about 12 or 13. Anthony, please, you have 5 minutes, and you are representing Ecology Ottawa, right? Yeah.
Okay, is it better like that? Yeah. So I'm the lead renewable city organizer at Ecology Ottawa. I work on the climate change file and energy. So I'm not an energy specialist. I'm a campaigner, but I do have quite a bit of understanding about the climate change issue, and I thought that in my presentation I could focus on the context in which this energy evolution strategy takes place. So right now we have the current we have the end of the COP23, the Conference of Parties. Our government has been in Bonn negotiating with other governments for final declaration on how to follow up on the Paris Agreement objectives, the objectives that were signed on by our federal government and virtually every country in the world. And the objective of that agreement is to limit warming to 2 degrees. And what came out of Bonn, and what scientists have also been saying for the last little while, is that to respect the objective in Paris to limit warming well below 2 degrees, or to limit it at 1.5 degrees, short-term ambition would need to be increased, and that's pre-2020 ambition. And why is that the case? It's because the way temperature increase depends on cumulative emissions on the atmosphere. So when we saw the pathway analyses before of renewable energy and the reductions, that's the area below the line is really what matters. That's the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are put in the atmosphere. And what we know is that with current reduction targets that have been adopted by our federal government and by governments around the world, we're currently heading to about 3 to 4 degrees of warming worldwide. So governments at COP, there's a recognition, the governments around the world, there's a recognition that there needs to be increased ambition in their climate plans. And what we're hoping at Ecology Ottawa is that with the energy evolution and what's out now, we have, what's great to see is that we understand the baseline, we understand the pathways, and that we could make substantial cuts in greenhouse gas emissions if we change our energy supply. So we have a good understanding of what the issue is and where we need to head. It's just that short-term ambition needs to be increased so that we could respect the Paris Agreement objectives. And what will be good to see is in phase 2 whether or not, in phase 2, the pathways to reduce energy demand, which is going to be a key piece. It's going to take years, perhaps decades, to put the renewable energy infrastructure in place to be able to make the cuts that we're seeing in phase 1. But energy demand, those cuts can, by changing behavior and by putting in place energy efficiency measures, can really increase really lead to deep cuts in emissions that are being called for by the scientific community, but then also now by the international community for respecting our climate commitments. And there is a report that was released by C40, and C40 is connected to the Compact of Mayors, which Ottawa is part of, but it came out about a year ago called Deadline 2020, which also acknowledged this fact, but put forward a way for cities to develop plans to increase their ambition so that we can respect the Paris Agreement objective. And I know that the city has already established these greenhouse gas reduction targets in 2016, but it's worth considering whether or not the short-term ambition will allow us to respect the Paris Agreement objectives and to really plan and to think about the types of cuts that are going to be required in the short term to let us respect those commitments. So we're happy to see these pathways when it comes and the analysis that has been done, and that we have the capacity in the city to be able to really make cuts in our energy supply. But what we're going to need to see is energy demand be decreased in the short term if we're going to be making those types of cuts and emissions called for by the scientific community. And okay, got a bit of time. So there's really a short window of opportunity is what I'm trying to get at. And we hope that there is going to be the proper resources, staffing, and funding to be able to put in place and implement a strategy that will lead to those kind of cuts that are being called for and that are expected by Canadians. And then when you look at Canadian public opinion, people are in favor of government taking urgent action to be able to respect our international commitments. So we're hoping that the City of Ottawa will be considering this and will also be informing themselves on what's happened at COP23, on what the scientific community is calling for, and we'll take this into consideration during the creation of Phase 2. And then also in Phase 2, there are a couple of items that we thought were really interesting. One of them is the governance side of it. So how is that going to look? And that's going to be an important piece to make sure that this is implemented at the speed that is required, as well as the Low Carbon Innovation Fund, which could really be a key piece into reducing energy demand. And we're hoping that that is going to be up to the ambition that's being called for by our scientific community. So I guess to sum up, really the short-term actions that are described, we're hoping that the city is going to make sure that those are all put in place before 2020. We know that on page 50 of the Energy Evolution Strategy, a lot of it is contingent, as the quote, contingent on staffing levels and available funding. But we hope that the city will do the right thing and make those the funds available on the staffing levels at the and make the staffing levels be able to meet, being able to put in place these short-term actions. There's no time to waste, and the window of opportunity to be able to increase the feasibility of respecting our international commitments is closing. We really need to step up to the plate on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from committee? Councillor Kakish?
Just a quick question on the demand. You focused quite a bit on the demand in your presentation. So what are some of the top 2 or 3 things that we can do as a municipality to tackle the demand side of things?
Well, on demand, there's a lot that can be done on just cultural change. We need to promote cultural change, that people understand the issue and understand that their energy consumption is part of the problem when it comes to climate change. There's a lot of misunderstanding with the issue of climate change, and a lot of people don't understand how the issue works. Unfortunately, climate literacy is not at where it should be. So there is a role for municipalities to play to increase climate literacy and to increase residents' ability to understand this information and to make the right choices. So there definitely is an information deficit that exists, and I think this has been acknowledged quite a bit by experts working on climate change. So if the city can use its current capacity to communicate to the public to increase those promote those behavioral changes, that would be one way. For the city to do so. Other places is building retrofits. I know before somebody had mentioned that Algonquin is creating, it has programs that's creating students to fill in to fill up the green jobs that could be available if we were going to be putting resources into building retrofits, et cetera. So I think that really having a program to reduce the energy demand that's being from households, buildings, et cetera, municipal facilities, that is another area that the city could put resources to make sure that that happens. But the city needs to consider also the scale. As I mentioned, it's really it's really what happens in the next 5 years that's going to determine whether or not we respect the next 5 years to decade. That's going to determine whether or not we respect our international objectives. So these things really need to be considered in the short term. But I think building retrofits is a major part of it. 49% of our emissions come from the way that we heat and cool our buildings in the city. So it's definitely a big chunk of the problem.
And what kind of progress has been made, or is that a new thing that's been discovered in terms of the climate literacy that you talked about?
So this has been discussed quite a bit within,
just in terms of making progress on that front, in terms of educational campaigns and making it perhaps more easy, or the information more easy for people in terms of that point that you made.
There's a lot of information that's available out there in the academic community. Unfortunately, in the policy community, a lot of the a lot of the research that has been done to respect the commitments made by, the long-term commitments made by governments, and not so much on the type of short-term deep emission cuts that we'd be required to respect our international commitments. But there is a lot of academic research and experts in academia that have produced research on how to make behavioral change. But then I mentioned earlier, there's also the C40 report, which has been distributed to C40 members like the City of Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, which does have a series of recommendations on how to make these type of short-term ambition increases in different pathways, let's say energy, buildings, waste, etc. So there are some recommendations in those reports that I would say is worth looking into. But there is quite a bit of literature out there, and I would even be willing to share it with members of council that would be interested in seeing that.
Thank you very much, then. Next is Kim Smet, Sustainable Eastern Ontario, and will be followed by Bill Eggertson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Smet. I'm speaking here today on behalf of Sustainable Eastern Ontario, an Ottawa-based environmental nonprofit. So we are a networking organization. We try to foster partnerships and collaborations on diverse sustainability activities throughout Eastern Ontario. And so our work in this sector really takes on diverse forms, from access to physical workspace, at the Sustainable Capacity Centre, from networking and strategic collaboration and outreach opportunities through our National Capital Environmental Nonprofit Network, or by offering social media, event planning, and bookkeeping services to nonprofits in the Ottawa area. So we're also involved at the moment in leading a number of our own substantive sustainability-focused initiatives related to energy and to green buildings. So we'd like to take this opportunity to speak out in strong support of the recently released Energy Evolution Report. So yes, previous speakers have argued that there is always more work that can and we should strive to be doing in the environmental sphere. We think, however, that this current first phase of energy evolution demonstrates the city's steadfast commitment to achieving energy reform and climate mitigation at the local scale. So the report describes a detailed and actionable 3-year plan focused on energy issues in Ottawa. The point of most direct interest and relevance to us were the 33 initiatives described in the report, which will be undertaken by the city and community partners over the next 3 years, as well as the community fund that will be established. As such a community partner with strong links to over 180 other nonprofits in the sustainability sector, we welcome the opportunity to collaborate more extensively in the future. Sustainable Eastern Ontario also has a growing history of collaborating with the City of Ottawa on sustainability initiatives. So for instance, currently through an IESO-funded grant, we're working with Marika Clark and Jennifer Brown and a number of others to spotlight and to celebrate some conservation initiatives in the energy sector. And so it's in this spirit of continued collaboration and mutual support that we urge the Council to approve and initiate the recommendations described in the Energy Evolution Report. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present our views on this, and thanks for your attention.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the networking work that you do. Do we have any questions? No. Thank you, then. We'll move on to Bill Eggertson representing ESAC.
I'm back, and I'm speaking faster. Climate change is directly correlated with energy use, and any actions which reduce consumption of energy and supply the remaining demand with green power, green fuel, or green heat must be an overarching priority for the city. ESAC submitted 60 comments on the Phase 1 draft. We'll summarize a dozen of our non-technical concerns. 1, it's potentially counterproductive to examine supply before demand. Thinking of new ways to produce energy before knowing how much energy we may need is like debating the horse and the cart before we know if we even need to travel anywhere. Number 2, if citizens are to understand any part of this plan, we must speak in kilowatt hour and not in terajoule. The report converts cubic meters of natural gas and liters of gasoline and even electricity. If it converts into kWh, people can see how their behavior fits into the overall puzzle. Not using terms that people understand will impede clear communication of our goals and handicap our energy evolution. Number 3, the report totally ignores end-use applications, which is essential knowledge if we want to both reduce demand and to green the balance. For example, 89% of all energy in the residential and 74% in ICI facilities is for space heating, space cooling, and water heating. And that gives us a very clear focus of what needs to be done to change emissions. Number 4, Evolution estimates that Ottawa consumes 114,000 terajoules, that's 32 billion kilowatt hours, per year at a cost of $3 billion. This datum differs significantly from the Office of Energy Efficiency, which estimates our use at 50 billion kilowatt hours, 178,000 terajoules, with 5 billion leaving our community to import mainly fossil fuel. Ironically, local production of renewable energy is estimated at 5% and 4% respectively, although they factor different values. Number 5, Ottawa must be quite different from the rest of our province, where electricity is 15% of energy versus 28% for us. Electricity is a carrier. It is not a primary energy. Electrons can reduce carbon, but only because 61% of our electricity is from nuclear reactors. They are low carbon, but they are not renewable. Number 6, Phase 1 ignores the role of storage for non-dispatchable renewables. My microfit solar panels generate no power during winter peak time of use rate, and any plan needs to address the profound implications for peak versus baseload electricity demand. Number 7, we avoid any discussion of unintended consequences, such as the need for many more nuclear reactors to generate the fuel for our Teslas and Chevy Volts, or the need for more high-voltage transmission lines, such as the $75 million tower into South Nepean. Number 8, I'm hoping that someone will ask, if our municipality is the 4th largest in terms of size, with 75% rural, why is there not a single commercial wind turbine anywhere in Ottawa? Number 9, while space heating per unit is declining, the dramatic increase in electric space cooling is the largest percentage increase in any energy end use, and that poses significant implications under a warming climate and under peak TOU demand. Number 11, most attention is on new installations, which usually are easier and more cost-effective. I renovated my older house into the top 20 of energy homes in Canada, excluding my solar panels, and my investment yields a larger bang for buck on reduced energy consumption, lower GHG emissions, and time of use profile than any new house in Ottawa. And finally, number 12, for years, Council has said it has no operational or policy jurisdiction over Hydro Ottawa, and nor can it direct it to comply with the municipal policies. Clarification on this governance barrier is critical. In closing, a few quick comments on the Phase 1 plan, which need more attention. Municipal mechanisms, such as local improvement charges, job creation or job retention or economic development by reducing the $5 billion annual outflow to import fossils, air quality, health benefits, consumer comfort, less fires, lower transmission, greater resiliency, and many other factors which alone should dictate the need to evolve our energy. Communication strategy to promote the adoption of whatever we agree on, and a bit more mention of life cycle costing, or the use of the term investment rather than cost. If anyone thinks that ESAC is opposed to energy evolution, quite the contrary. I've been involved in all aspects of renewable energy and climate security for 30 years, and my experience is that everyone is in favor of clean air, singing birds, fresh water, healthy communities. They're just not quite thrilled about paying for it. There will always be reluctance when stakeholders are not told the difficult questions and provided with the often unpopular answers that show how to invest sustainably in an energy evolution in Ottawa. This is Council's chance to do it properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. And fast but clear, and on time. Do we have any questions for Mr. Eggertson? Again, I believe you submitted that in writing for us to review at a slower speed where we can absorb all of those very specific points. Thank you. And later I will be asking questions of staff to what degree they may have response to some of those points that you've raised.
No fire alarms today. No fire alarms today. No.
For anyone who didn't get that reference, the last time Bill appeared before us, the fire alarm went off and we... All right. Thank you. I see no questions directly for you then. Stu Campagna next, please, followed by Kara Stonehouse.
There we go. I represent EnviroCenter's Carbon 613. Carbon 613 is a target-based sustainability program for Ottawa businesses. We help local businesses and organizations set and meet greenhouse gas reduction targets. The City of Ottawa was one of our first members back in 2016. We currently have 33 members across the City of Ottawa. And our members recognize that environmental sustainability and energy efficiency have a direct impact on their bottom line. And so for our members, and I might venture to say for the Ottawa business community on the whole, energy evolution is as much an economic strategy as it is an environmental one. And like any economic strategy, it needs to be tracked and measured very closely. Our members, like your credit union and the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board, have already set strong but attainable short-term corporate emission reduction targets and are tracking their carbon footprint every year very closely to make sure that they're on pace to meet those goals. We'd like to see that the City of Ottawa, as great as that 80% stretch goal is, complement it by joining their fellow Carbon 613 members in setting a short-term goal and allowing us to track and measure and celebrate our successes from these energy evolution initiatives and help us to look at maybe which should be prioritized and see where we're on pace and where we're not.
Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I was at a workshop about 2 years ago at the Museum of Nature, and I think the school board was one of the panel speakers about them just joining and their focus on doing their part as well. Is there anything that they're doing that the city isn't that you think that we can take note of? We're comparatively speaking, large public organization, many buildings that we both have in our portfolios. Can you give some quick examples of what they're doing that maybe we can sink our teeth into?
Well, I don't know which things, comparing apples and oranges a little bit, the school board, but they're very good at monitoring the real-time energy use of their schools. They've been very proactive in upgrading heating systems and improving the building envelopes to reduce heat loss. They've swapped out most, if not all, of their fleet to more efficient vehicles. There are more items, and I'd be happy to talk to city staff about where they can potentially collaborate.
Thank you, and Stu, we spoke about a couple of weeks ago about the appropriateness of Ottawa looking at that, adopting a short-term goal along with our longer-term ones, but felt that this meeting, it was shoehorning into a different strategy. So I will be looking to staff as to, I believe our next quality and climate change management plan update is in the winter or spring, is that right?
Yeah, it's generally in Q1. We were at committee February 21st last year, or this year.
So as I believe you know, I'll be looking to how the city might look at a short-term target at that meeting, but we deemed it separate from what we were trying to do here today, but thank you for raising that and the work that you're doing.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Kara Stonehouse, please, and she will be followed by Angela Keller-Herzog.
Good afternoon. I'm representing Tucker House Renewal Center. We're an environmental education charity, and we're just in full support of the energy evolution plan to go forward with some additional requests and hopes for that. So firstly, thank you so much, everyone, for all the work you're doing and for participating in the project that we've been working on in collaboration with many community partners, the city, businesses, and academics, and many stakeholders on our building our energy evolution collective impact initiative. So we've met with Andrea Flowers and Marika and Jen Brown, and we're building on the success of the sounding boards and pulling the community together even more to really energize and really help leverage and resource opportunity. So the challenge is to really leverage the small amount of funds that the city can offer, which is fantastic, but to really turn that into something bigger so that we can achieve these huge 80% goals. So we need to really engage the community, we need to think bigger, we need to scale up the action dramatically. And we're coming with an offer to help that happen better. So if you can have a really strong collaboration and partnership with the stakeholders you currently have and bringing them together and really bringing the leadership and the participation so the highest level influencers can get together with a collective impact process, then we can really energize this to happen. And what we can bring to the table is $75,000 in 2018. If we're showing a really strong front together, we can win this. We have a very good chance of winning this funding from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and in subsequent years, $500,000 per year for 3 years. So that's a really huge impact on this project, on the numbers. And so everyone's saying, where's this extra money going to come from? And I say, it's going to come from the community. So let's really build it together. And so what we can offer with some of that funding is we have staff time to help coordinate and facilitate a collective strategy on the medium term. We've already been working in the medium term on a theory of change of how it would look holistically. And we're sharing that now with our stakeholders for the final feedback and advisories. And so we can help access. So many of the delegates, many of the stakeholders are charities who are excellent at creating and generating more funding. And so we can work together to help you leverage that. And we can connect also for the big thinking and really innovative thinking, we can connect to a fast track process, which is linked to the Singularity University that helps cities solve complex problems with 10 times less the cost. By applying exponential technology such as AI, drones, and all that sort of stuff. So they run pilot projects, and the best thing about that project is they also leverage funds from the corporate world so that you can have millions of dollars of seed funding for these projects. So a lot of potential here. So our request to make this all work is a really strong partnership that's where the city is one actor and the community and the business and the academics are all equal partners at a table, kind of making a petaled flower leadership structure. Being really bold in our financial innovation. That's what's really we can't solve the problem from how many, $500,000 can, but we need to really change really allow capital to flow into Ottawa for these projects to be done. And sometimes having the city as a financial kind of a backer is the real leverage point there, where you don't actually put money up, but you can put security up, and then you can actually benefit financially from those funds. So we'll talk and have more meetings about that. And then really having the mayor become a really vocal champion would be fantastic. He's already great, but to really champion this energy evolution and encourage the senior management participation in some of these larger events, and would be good. And then what's kind of the plan right now is very technical, and it's missing some of the holistic elements of the literacy and the leadership. So I'd really like to see that strengthened, maybe through the Community Innovation Fund, putting some of those ideas into place around the community energizing through programs such as community dialogues throughout the city to energize people and understand what all the possibilities are, or radio spots and that sort of thing. And so that's where Tucker House, being the literacy specialist, would be great help with that. And that's my time. So in conclusion, great work, keep going, think even bigger, get real awesome on your leadership, and let's do it.
Thank you very much, Kara. Any questions? No, seeing none. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And to you, like everyone else, thank you for sticking in all this time. So Angela Keller-Herzog will be followed by Roger Peters.
So my friend in the red shirt is coming up, as usual. Okay, so while that's coming up, I'm with Cafes Ottawa. So as you recall, I represent the Green Point people in the community associations across the city, people that read those long reports, and people who have lots to say. Okay, so David, you gave me 5 minutes? Okay, it was my understanding that, wrong presentation. Sorry, guys. Can you start the clock again? I'm sorry.
We've given you a few extra minutes again because you're representing a large number of groups.
So I'm able to have?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
But don't use all of it if you don't have to.
Okay, I won't. I had a strategy for what to do if I only got 5. Let me flip down one. Yeah, okay. So my presentation is called 1355. Now, what's that all about? I'm going to tell you about 13 likes and 5 concerns and then 5 constructive solutions. So the emotional profile of this presentation, actually I can start with some sad, and then we'll move to glad, we'll go to fear, and then we'll resolve the fear. So I'm hoping to keep you alert and engaged, as you can tell. So the sad part, and I didn't write down the sad part, is that we're pleased to get the energy evolution phase 1, but we do realize that we're really getting a third of the deliverable a year late. And as a committee, you're the receiving party, you're representing the public here. You should be aware of that. We are a bit behind, and we don't really have a plan for how we're going to achieve the 80% greenhouse gas reductions. I'd say the cup is about a third full. But in consulting, speaking, dialoguing with the environmentally keen people in the community associations, there are a lot of things that we really appreciate, that we're happy to see in the energy evolution work. So I'm going to run through 13 happy points here. We recognize that there are thousands of hours of staff, consultant, and stakeholder time that have been spent. We fully support the underlying approach of working for a community-wide strategy, because in many of those cases, we're not thinking about what could be the alternative, but we're doing, I think, really the great thing. We also commend that there has been an excellent consultative process with lots of time spent on stakeholder engagement. We're highly appreciative that there is a really good quality of technical work underpins this energy evolution. So we're not winging it. And the consultancy monies, we think, are monies well spent. We recognize and appreciate the efforts that staff are making to identify and pursue the leverage and funding opportunities that we talked about earlier. We very much understand that the LRT is straining the city's investment capacity in both human and financial resources. So the fact that we're in that environment and we're still delivering is excellent. We applaud the forward thinking in identifying Ottawa hydro dividends as a sustainable source of funds. That's outside the box. And also outside the box, we applaud the Treasury Office for the pioneering work in floating municipal green bonds. I don't think that's been mentioned today, but Ottawa is, I think, like the first municipality across the country to do that. So that's actually pretty impressive. We support the approach, let's see, I have to flip. Yeah, there. We support the approach of seeking policy innovation, opportunities to create incentives, and the piloting approach. We like the idea of creating the Smart Energy Office. I won't go into the little bullet list here of what we think it can do. I think that it could be that we have different ideas than what Mr. Willis has in mind. We haven't really had that discussion. But we like the idea. There's lots to be done. We are delighted that the full-length document reflects an understanding that planning the energy transition for Ottawa is actually a critical pillar of our regional economic strategy. Because we can't just have the environmentalists talking in their little closet and then the economic development are in another committee. But we really, and I think this is the leadership also of Mr. Willis, is to bring these staff and these different disciplines together. And again, in the same vein, we like seeing the link between the smart city strategy to the smart grid engineers and the energy evolution project. And at the city committee level, I think having FEDCO supporting the smart energy and smart grid, and here us talking energy evolution, to know that these are connected efforts, and that Councillor Hubley and Councillor Harder are on the same page. This enterprise is really great. So we're happy also, and this is not intuitive, we're happy that these significant efforts have been made for these short-term actions, because it's not really obvious that when you're in a constrained resource environment, when you've only done half of your strategy, that you should start doing actions. So that's actually really great to say, yes, we can do short-term actions while we're doing other parts of the energy strategy. So kudos to you, and I'm really glad that I had this time to bring out these positive messages that the people I'm speaking for brought out. So I now have 5 points of concern. The first one I'm going to skip right over because we've talked about staffing, which we see as a critical need. The second point is we are concerned that the terms of reference for the Community Energy Innovation Fund should be delivered on a timely basis. Now, orally, this committee has heard several times that there's an expectation to deliver those terms of reference in Q1 for the February meeting. That commitment is not there in writing, so some of our people were concerned that, hey, if this gets delivered only later on in the year, that could be a risk to timely progress. The third point is a solid and timely phase 2 report. This second half of the renewable energy strategy should be delivered in a timely fashion, including consultations with stakeholders. Now, if you look at the document, which has what you are looking at to approve and the staff recommendations, there is no delivery date for when phase 2 is going to be complete. And I tried to listen all morning long. I might have missed it if it was said orally. But our recommendation to this committee is to direct staff to deliver the phase 2 energy evolution strategy by a specific date. Because I think right now it's hanging, and we've heard a call for the Q1 19 update report on phase 1 of energy evolution, but I don't think we have a pop date for the phase 2. Okay, point 4. In my presentation earlier, I laid it out as 3 pieces: phase 1, phase 2, and this long-term energy strategy modeling work. The documentation is actually contradictory, whether that is a separate piece to be done after phase 2 or whether that is a part of phase 2. Now, I noticed that Mr. Willis in his presentation earlier was very clear that this long-term energy modeling and strategy work would be part of phase 2. So I think the committee should seek clarity on that because the current documentation is contradictory. My 5th point, perhaps in some ways is the most important in terms of its long-term benefits if it's picked up by you folks. Our concern is that we need proper carbon accounting and emissions reporting. And the measurement of energy use and fuel mix is the equivalent of carbon and greenhouse gas accounting once the units are converted. So we're concerned that if we are not measuring, tracking, and reporting on energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, then we are not able to manage the energy transition. We are concerned that the current reporting requirement for staff to report to this committee is only every 4 years on Ottawa's greenhouse gas emissions. And that's the community and corporate emissions. And I think a periodicity of every 4 years is inadequate and doesn't give us enough traction to manage, redirect, and hold accountable. So our recommendation is that this committee should direct staff to report at least annually on community and corporate greenhouse gas emissions, energy use and mix, and to make this data available on the Ottawa Open Data Catalog. Again, I have lots of people on my team So some of them are keenly aware of also the potential of this data portal that could then help researchers and others who are engaged in this effort in the long-term transition. So thank you, councillors, for your attention, and please consider taking our constructive recommendations forward to direct staff.
Thank you very much, Angela. Do we have any questions? Councillor McKinney?
I just, it'll be to staff when time comes, just along the direction. I'd just like to hear back from you, and perhaps I can give the direction that the community is asking for.
Well, we'll deal with it at that time then. I guess a heads up on some of the points raised. You can clarify exactly which ones, since there were a number, if not all of them. All right. Okay, thank you, Angela. Any other questions? No, seeing none. Roger Peters, who will be followed by Robert Walker. Let's go ahead. Welcome.
I'm Roger Peters. I'm one of the founding members of the Ottawa Renewable Energy Co-op. We invest our members' capital in community-owned solar systems across Ottawa. We've been going for 5 years now. We've grown to 700 members. These members are residents of Ottawa who would like to invest their savings in local environmental and social projects, which meets one of the objectives of energy evolution. These members have invested over $7 million in the last 5 years in 17 projects across the city on schools, industrial buildings, barns, and co-op housing. We've paid an average of about 4% per year on these investments. The Ottawa Renewable Energy Co-op was one of the community partners that's worked with the city on energy evolution. And I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate city staff on the work they've done at these thousands of hours that people have referred to before. The Phase 1 report sets out a really good series of actions, both by the city and by community partners. I think we need to draw attention to the fact that out of the energy consumption and emissions, only 2% come from corporate emissions. The rest are from the community itself. So energy evolution needs to address that 98%. The Renewable Energy Co-op plans to play its part in Phase 1. We plan to increase our membership to 1,000 in the next year. We plan to invest an additional $5 million into several projects. These projects will include ones that feed the grid, but also ones that sell power to individual residential customers from systems on their buildings through the net metering arrangement. We can now provide 25-year contracted power from solar systems to these under these net metering arrangements that would actually within a few years cost less than buying power from the grid. So it provides those people with a savings and a hedge against future increases. We're at a bit of a point now where we're now looking at new opportunities. The Selling to the Grid program is being finished. We're now able to move into the net metering area. We're also looking at things like investing in energy efficiency retrofits, heat pumps, and these kinds of things. This requires some readiness for the community. Several of the actions in energy evolution involve readying the community, readying Hydro Ottawa, doing community energy planning, which will need to set the scene for us to be able to encourage people to invest locally the way we're doing now. I think there's a huge opportunity to leverage those community savings into things that meet the energy evolution objectives. So I would therefore encourage the committee to support all 4 recommendations that are before you today. We were a bit disappointed this morning to hear that staff resources would not be increased. We're, I think, among those who don't think that the current staff resources would be sufficient to do all the things that are in in there. So some priority may need to be done. We would like that priority to focus a lot on community readiness, outreach, leverage, those kinds of things, those kinds of activities that really allow the community to move forward and support the kinds of things in phase one. And also, we're prepared to work, to play our part, and also to work with the city on the evolution of, or the development of evolution phase two. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Roger? No, seeing none. Robert Walker next, please, who will be followed by Brian Mitchell. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm Robert Walker. I'm with the Burns Rapids Renewable Energy Association. We're a not-for-profit community organization, and our goal is to put a hydro generating station in the existing Parks Canada level control dam in Burns Rapids, and use the profits from the sale of electricity to fund community projects and initiatives. We were one of the groups consulted for the Energy Evolution Plan, and I believe we're number 4 on the list of things to do. So some people are taking some exceptions to the plan, but we think it's a good start. And we also think it's time to move from the planning to the execution and starting to get things done. And to illustrate the necessity of moving forward, I'd like to illustrate an upcoming issue that we're going to be having and a solution for it. The biggest of our future energy consumption is the electric car. Folks at IESO and Hydro Ottawa really don't have a handle on how much this is going to increase demand and what the timelines are for this. But we do know that right now there's a big waiting list for people to buy electric cars. And when they get their car, they're going to take it home and they're going to plug it in at home overnight so that they can drive it to work next day or drive it shopping or take the kids to soccer or whatever else. Because they're plugging it at night, the issue is that we can't use solar to charge them up. And right now, the storage methodologies for solar are quite a ways away. You can sort of picture this. In Ottawa, 5 years from now, we might have 30 to 50,000 electric cars sitting there charging up overnight. And where are we going to get the electricity for this? And the only other renewable energy source of any volume that we can use is water power. Now, right now, the water power potential in the Ottawa River is already pretty much in use, and that leaves the Rideau River. And for the most part, the Rideau River is Parks Canada territory. There are potential sites at Watson's Mill in Manotick, Hogsback, Andrewsville, and a few others. But these sites are 4 to 5 years away from coming online if we start now, by which time there'll be a lot of electric cars around. Our project is could be online within 2 years and serve as a pilot project for the others. We already have the financing, so no Ottawa tax dollars are required to get this going. We have a design, build, and maintain contractor to do the work. We have preliminary permission from Parks Canada to go ahead with this. And out of several groups that have applied for permission to do this sort of work on the Rideau and Trent Severn systems, we're the only one that got their permission because we're the only group that they feel can do the job. Our contractor already has a very good relationship with Parks Canada, and all we need to move forward is a contract to buy the electricity. And to get this going, we need very, very little staff time, mostly from Ottawa Hydro to arrange the contract. We don't need any tax dollars. And this project will be a pilot for a low-head hydro using the latest technology. It's using an existing dam infrastructure, the same as Watson's Mill in Andrewsville. It's a small hydro pilot for Ottawa Hydro in their own backyard. And it's a chance for Hydro Ottawa to work positively with Parks Canada. And this is a really good public-private partnership for water development. Another is that the turbines are made by companies that manufacture in Ontario, as opposed to solar panels coming from China. So that's why we think that, one of the reasons we think that it's time to get going on the energy evolution plan. And any issues with the plan can be worked out over time. Any big plan, you're always fine-tuning it and changing it and modifying it. So we'd really like to see some progress in the short term. And I guess our question is when can Bria and some of the other low-hanging fruit projects get going on this? Practical solutions to the problems. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, and it's interesting to hear all the work you've done. I visited that site about 10 years ago, and I guess it was still, whatever, the apple in the eye of a number of people who foresaw a possibility of that project. It's rapid, so. Well,
the founder of our group is Mary Hagan, and she's a former Ottawa City Councillor.
It was Mary and one other who gave me the tour. Yeah.
Mayor Watson has already been down to the dam site a couple times, and he speaks highly of the project. He helped us out, and Scott Moffat helped us out with some representations to the Ontario Energy Minister, who didn't listen anyway. So.
There's only so much we can do.
We've had good support from council here, so we appreciate that.
Thank you once again. Any questions, Elliot? No. Thank you for coming. All right, so we are at Brian Mitchell, followed by Paul Cairns. Welcome, Brian.
Hi. Thank you, councillors. I'm here as an individual organization. And first off, I would like to commend city staff and the city overall and its consultants for the excellent underpinnings provided to the city and its residents through the 9 pathway studies that have been prepared to assist the energy evolution strategy. Now, together with the greenhouse gas baseline study, they provide a solid beginning towards a roadmap for how residents and businesses of Ottawa, together with our municipality, can achieve the city's stated goal of reducing greenhouse gases by 8% from 2012 levels by 2050. Clearly, though, there is much more to do, since even the aggressive assumptions in the study do not on their own achieve the 80% goal. But it is a start. So my primary concern with the strategy is that although it's a decent start in terms of pathways and studies, it falls short on actions that will lead Ottawa down these paths, especially if we want to achieve close to the aggressive GHG reduction scenarios, which would require action to start now. In particular, I would like to highlight the absence of actions, sufficient actions in my view, to support the rapid electrification of transportation. And I do find this particularly surprising, since the Evolution Energy Strategy shows on page 45, great graph there, by the way, it shows that the electrification of transportation provides the single largest contribution towards the reduction of greenhouse gases in both the conservative and aggressive scenarios. Indeed, together addressing heating, particularly in the pathway studies looking at heat pumps, just addressing space heating and transportation on their own deals with well over 80% of the greenhouse gas challenge facing the city. Now, over the next 3 years, which is the time frame of the short-term actions outlined in the strategy, there will be growth in the number and variety of electric vehicles available from car manufacturers. We know this. However, a major barrier to ownership for residents in Ottawa is the feasibility of overnight charging, which is the preferred means of charging these vehicles, as is noted in the pathway study. Now, this is particularly a major obstacle for residents living in condos and apartments and those dependent on parking lots or permitted on-street parking for overnight parking. Missing from the short-term action plan are actions that would be scalable pilot initiatives that would address this obstacle. So while applauding the EV initiatives that are contained in the strategy, such as the proposed Discovery Centre, EV Discovery Centre for Ottawa, I strongly encourage the committee to amend this strategy to include additional short-term actions that will accelerate adoption of EVs by Ottawa residents. Some examples. Well, the City of Toronto has introduced minimum EV charging requirements for multi-residential developments, and they are now also preparing a pilot initiative to provide overnight on-street EV charging facilities for parking permit holders. The Evolution Energy Strategy should also include a pilot initiative with cost sharing at other levels of government that the City, together with Hydro Ottawa, would undertake to incent existing commercial parking lots and residential parking garages to install overnight charging stations with metering to enable recovery of electricity costs from the EV owner. And the strategy's action plan should also include near-term effort to work together with Hydro Ottawa to identify specific power transmission and distribution obstacles and areas within the city that would impact EV charging capacity, a bit as we heard in the previous speaker, and ensure that produces initiatives which, again, on a cost-sharing basis, could be implemented to address those specific transmission obstacles. And finally, since I have seconds left, I was a bit surprised, not talking about EVs, that there was nothing in the strategy that I could see that dealt with not just how to shift energy supply, but also how to shift off investment in fossil fuel energy supply. There's nothing about divestment of resources and the city's own resources from the fossil fuel sector. I'm a bit surprised that that wasn't in there. So while the Evolution Energy is a good start, it should be additional short-term actions to ensure that the evolution desired actually takes place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Any questions specifically? I know I'll have a couple of follow-up with staff on a couple of the points you raised about our EV charging, and although somewhat related to the next agenda item, your focus is not so much on our own municipal property and garages as facilitating through policy for the average citizen and condo and apartment owner, so we'll follow up on that. Any questions? No, seeing none. Try that again. Thanks again. Paul Cairns, followed by Trevor Hache.
Hey, how's everyone doing? I know it's been a long day. Thanks for giving me some time to speak. I'm Paul Cairns, Executive Director of SmartNet Alliance. We are an alliance of businesses in Ottawa and across Ontario in the green energy field. And we work with them to bring ideas forward so that we can move ahead and transition to a sustainable economy. So I'd like to first come out and say I fully support this energy evolution, currently for the beginning of it. But I do want to address the one issue which I think has been overlooked, which is funding. So long term, and we've been debating this over and over, is we want to do all of these things, and we have support from the committees, and we have all of this support from the community, but the problem is we can't fund the restrictions of a municipal government. They need to have revenue to offset the costs associated with these programs. So I'm here to talk about ideas that you use to turn energy evolution and more specifically the Community Energy Innovation Fund into a revenue stream rather than a cost center. One thing that we keep doing is we keep going for the short-term wins, and I'm really glad that we're doing these short-term things and we're getting shovels to the ground. Those are great, but we need to address ways that we can do that. So there's a couple of ideas that I would like to share, and this will take a considerable effort, like across multiple committees and at multiple levels of government, but I think that this is the best time. Everyone has the support behind it. All three levels of government support it. The community supports it. So this is the best time for council to act. And so one is to The City of Ottawa's infrastructure, I think there is a lot of there's a lot of space there for if you were to set up an agreement where any operation savings that come from these energy retrofits go into the Community Energy Innovation Fund. So you cap, one way to do that is rather than have RFPs based on capital expenditure, have them on life cycle cost. And that way there might be an upfront capital increase, so you might have decreased projects initiated. Over the long run, over a 20-year time frame, those will become cash flow positive that can then go into the Community Energy Innovation Fund. Another idea is the Vancouver, they have the STEP code, which is, there is a caveat in Ontario, but I'll get to that. In Vancouver, they have the STEP code, which is their building code. You have regular code, and then there's R2000, net zero carbon, and every level, and then they reduce a level. But one thing that the City of Ottawa might be able to do is produce this kind of a code, but make it when people apply for permits, they pay higher for going lower down the tiers, and you pay less for going for higher energy efficiency. So as people, this will increase short-term revenues because people will say, okay, well, I'll pay the extra $1,000 to be my energy hog right now, so the city will get that extra rather than the $10,000 for the energy efficiency. But then that money can go into the fund that I'm discussing. And then the other thing is GEARS and the HELP program, and I know you guys change because this has been to the city staffers twice, but I do believe, and I will also address the STEP code thing, I do believe that if you were to do the STEP code in conjunction with a LIC funding program, then you could actually follow them. The reason GEARS and HELP have failed is because they have not had adoption by the community. So if you force or provide incentive for the community to uptake these energy efficiency measures, then you will also, on the other side, then provide a mechanism for them to seek financing, and then the Energy Evolution Fund could be a financing mechanism that is gaining returns on investment. Now, that's the thing with the STEP code, like a good time for collaboration is the STEP code in Ontario. The Ontario government does not allow for the STEP code to be, because they control the codes, unlike BC, municipalities can control their codes, but in Ontario you cannot. You have these failed programs of GEARS, and you have this failed program of HELP, and if you, the City of Ottawa, were to combine with the City of Toronto and the City of Guelph to lobby the project, I think that you could have a very good case for getting that regulation changed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Do we have any questions? Members? Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cairns. And yes, I agree with you in your presentation. What you said without saying is better business cases.
Yes.
Better business cases. Mm-hmm. And especially in a dossier like the environment, we cannot be short-sighted in our, and it was said by someone earlier using the words investment, not costs. Mm-hmm. And so I know that this city has adopted a business case strategy. I was just looking it up quickly as you were, it was in 2013, that staff need to do better business cases for these files and for these projects so that we can make the decisions that are appropriate. So I don't have a question, Mr. Acting Chair, but I just want to thank you, and the point is taken, and I'll be bringing it up with staff, so thank you.
Great, and we would be more than willing to help with providing help with that.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your delegation, Mr. Cairns, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Trevor Hachey's next. Sure, yep. We'll load it down here. There we go. We all set?
Sorry about that.
It's okay. So you have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair and members of this committee and city staff. I just want to make clear I'm speaking as an individual member of the Healthy Transportation Coalition today. I've been at sounding board meetings related to energy evolution, as has a colleague of mine within the coalition, Jeff Stiles, who was here earlier today. I'm very concerned, obviously, about climate change and global warming on a personal level. I have kids, and I worry often about the state of the planet that we are leaving them. And I think we all have a moral responsibility, really intergenerational injustice, to do everything we can to make the state of the planet inhabitable and one in which we can all thrive. And we're really at a serious risk of leaving them something that is the opposite of that. I remember when a small group of us first got together more than 10 years ago now to form an organization that has grown tremendously since then, called Ecology Ottawa, to urge the City of Ottawa to take meaningful action on climate change to reduce greenhouse gas pollution. As I said, that was more than 10 years ago, and sadly, besides the light rail transit plans, I would say we are still waiting for the city to take meaningful action to reduce greenhouse gas pollution. Certainly, energy evolution is a good first start, and I wholeheartedly support the process that people have been going through for months now, and I'm glad to see it finally here moving forward. I would support the calls that others have made to ensure that the city gets involved in Carbon 613 and that it create and achieve short-term greenhouse gas pollution reduction targets. The lack of that commitment at the moment really makes you wonder how serious we are about the issue if we don't have short-term targets. Today, as a member of the Healthy Transportation Coalition, I just wanted to emphasize the importance that phase 2 of the energy evolution process represents when dealing with transportation. I remember when the NCC and the City of Gatineau and the City of Ottawa collaborated on the Choosing Our Future initiative back in 2011. And at that time, they put out a nice little graph that showed the ability of municipalities to influence different policy realms. And transportation was one of those policy realms that the municipalities actually have a huge influence over. And so I hope that getting to pay attention to the transportation side of things will be a huge focus of phase 2, and we can start taking some meaningful actions in that area. I think that we need to also think about climate justice. So for those who aren't familiar with the term, it's basically the idea that those who have contributed most to the carbon pollution that's in the atmosphere aren't really doing much to stop that at present, and those who have contributed least are going to experience the worst consequences. So low-income people around the world where they don't really have a car, for example, and haven't really been contributing to emissions from their car, in Bangladesh and places like that, they're literally losing their country to rising ocean levels. So when we think about transportation and climate justice, I think before you on the slides, we really need to think about things like inclusive public transit. Light rail is wonderful. We need it to be affordable to people, so there's a variety of things that we're suggesting Ottawa could do to make public transit more inclusive. Certainly we're grateful for the Equa Pass and the promise of the Equa Fare. We still think needs to be done to really increase the ridership levels. So there's still far too many people driving their cars and not enough people on public transit. And so I think the city, as it goes through the energy evolution process, really needs to think about the cost of transit fares for people. And they're projected to go up again next year in budget 2018. We'd also focus on helping low-income cyclists and pedestrians. So putting a real emphasis on low-income neighborhoods, like, for example, Hawthorne Meadows in Sheffield Glen, where Jean Cloutier resides. It's one of the neighborhoods that has fairly close proximity to rapid transit stations, Walkley Station, for example, St. Laurent Station, but really missing connections in terms of cycling infrastructure between those stations. Is that the time saying it's up? Yeah. Okay, so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Any questions? Thank you. Interesting, an angle that we hadn't got at here, but a very important one. All right, which takes us to our last two speakers, Joan Haysom, followed by Felix Wellfield.
There we go. Thanks very much for letting me speak. I walk a careful line here, as you know, having been one of the consultants in Phase 1 project, and being very proud of the contributions that we did put forward on that. I chose to come and speak just to highlight a couple of points, because I've in fact been a long-term stakeholder in this space in Ottawa as well, and the engagement through the starting part of this process led to the interactions and so forth. Phase 2 of the project has an awful lot of tasks ahead of it. As noted very well by so many of the other speakers, that all of transportation and all of buildings need some due attention, and those are big files. Energy as a whole is a big file. I think what we've put together has been some very good starting points, developing strategy, but there's still an awful lot to do. Even by the time it goes through, I'm a little concerned about calling it a plan as opposed to a program. This is going to be a long-term, ongoing set of actions and initiatives that need to be led by some knowledgeable staff and full-time staff that know that they have the backing to make some innovative things happen. So I'd like to see that city councillors recognize that if you're going to hold up to your targets of 80% reductions, that you take the necessary actions to make sure, truly sure, that you're going to be moving towards those things. I concur with very many of the speakers that spoke earlier. I just want to mention really a point about on the other side of things about economic development, and reiterate two things. One is that 98% of the emissions are in the community, and that's the purpose of this program. It's about getting the community more involved in reducing its emission reductions. So we need to see a bit more in outreach to the community, literacy, engagement, and I think some of that can come straight from the city having a vision. And some of that vision should be that it embraces a clean energy economy. If Ottawa does not recognize the potential and where this giant industry is headed, we risk being left behind. We're talking about investments. This is another thing I want to repeat on this, not costs. When we build an urban canopy, it's an investment in the health of the city and the livelihood, the livability of the city. When we invest in clean energy economy, it has several advantages. One is the reduced energy costs that each of the citizens and businesses will incur, giving them more bottom line revenues that they can use in other places to flourish their businesses. It also builds more local jobs, and it results in long-term savings. Sometimes these paybacks are not short, but they are there, and they are there. Once you get things going, it's a long-term savings, and we really have to recognize that. So I that we're talking about evaluating things from a business case point of view. So I see this very much as an economic development initiative as well, and I'd like to recommend that this has a direct connection with FEDCO and with with Invest Ottawa and Smart City Initiative as well. Energy is a giant file, and energy economy is a giant file, and we need some of that side of it to play into supporting these directions forward as well. Invest Ottawa to pass, if I may, they've talked about supporting clean tech companies, but that's different than supporting a clean energy economy and encouraging people to innovate within their own landscape, within their own houses, within their buildings, and in partnership with the city as well. When we start talking about district energy systems, it's not high tech, but it's an investment process because we know it's got some long-term benefits to it. I think I'll leave it there. I just wanted to make sure that those points were brought to light because this is such an important and such a large file. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan. You make some very excellent points. Do we have any questions? No. Seeing none, then, we move to Felix, and you'll remind me if I pronounce it right, Velfeld. Who is delegation? Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Felix Velfeld. I'm coming here as a representative of the Ottawa Community Association, but mostly also as myself. I'm a concerned citizen. I'm not an expert, and there are many important, facts about the requiring expertise presented already. So I will mostly refer to the sentiments which I have about that issue and which I share actually with many friends of mine. So first of all, we looked at that report about energy evolution, and we are absolutely amazed. It's a great thing to see, great thing to read, and there was a lot of already. I do appreciate that that report came out, and now only because there was a significant political pressure on the side of the community to have it, even though the plan of energy thing, but whatever was presented in the spring was really plan to plan, and the fact that we already have something tangible, it's already a great achievement, but it didn't happen by chance. Other than this is a beautiful document, there is a lot of sentiments which are not that positive, which I have, and mostly that requires timing, but timing for an action, which is, in my mind, we are already behind, and some actions are planned for the future. The timing for reporting, as already has been mentioned, which is in 4 years or whatever, and most importantly, the timing for the goals, targets, and outcomes, right? There are actions which are suggested, there is a time when they are to be implemented, but there is no target connected to the time when the results should be visible, and what the results really should be several times. In Smart City, which we are becoming very intensely with all the high tech which we have in the city, with the expertise of 2 universities and whatever, with the open data philosophy which we have, I would expect some concrete, almost real-time reporting to the citizenry like myself, who is interested in that, who would like to see the results as they are coming out, and who probably will be motivated by seeing those results as well. One of the maybe semi-expert opinion I have is there is a lot of talking about pathways reporting, doing models and whatever. For me, I am very much interested in a very easy to get number, which is just the total sales or consumption of the fossil fuels in the city, both city as a corporation and city as a whole. And this is something which can be produced without any models, and just published, and I don't think it's any secrecy. And last but not least, I would like, one of the impressions I have from reading that report is that as excellent material as it is very expert, is specialized, and is kind of siloed into that energy evolution, energy transition, technicalities. And I am lacking, not that this is, maybe this is not in that report, but something like energy emissions climate change lens to be applied across the city for every one activity, starting from the building permits, you know, to look at the opportunity, any building permit, whether some efficiency, essentially for opportunity. Yeah, the one of the things is that this is, in my mind, this is too much on transition from one energy to the other and not enough about conserving energy, reducing the demand for energy, which applies to the building permits, to the land use planning, to the transportation, and everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming. I thank you for everyone who has spoken. That is the end of our public delegation. So now we'll take questions to staff. I'll start taking a list. Go ahead, Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to, as I mentioned, I probably should have come over and given you a heads up on which ones I was going to ask about, but sorry about that. Just back to Cafe's presentation, and they did ask some pretty basic but targeted questions around, I'm looking at 3 of them, the delivery of the terms of reference for the Community Energy Fund. So I'm interested in staff and their thoughts on that, if we can get that in writing, when we might be able to see that. But the other 2 that I'm really interested in are the Phase 2 report, and if we could get a specific date for that, and also number 5, the carbon accounting and emissions report. Your thoughts on an annual reporting back on that.
Mr. Chair, first of all, on the terms of reference for the Community Energy Innovation Fund, our plan is to bring that forward in Q1 2018. On the issue of the Phase 2 report, this is a very technically complex, extensive process, and with the amount of consultation we hope to do, our target is Q4 2019 to complete that, although I'm quite prepared to bring forward a sort of a progress briefing to committee to let committee know sooner than that on how we're going. And it was certainly our intent to do that with the environmental, the ESAC committee, and I'm quite fine to do that as well. And on the issue of annual reporting, we do corporate reporting for the City of Ottawa's own every year. And the next report is coming out in the new year to the committee. As for the 4-year, Federation of Canadian Municipalities in their work benchmarks and recommends that they're done every 3 to 5 years for community level inventories. And as you can appreciate, the data is not easy to collect because it's not all within our power. We have to go, our consultant was very successful in gathering that information, but it actually took a long time to even get the data to do that. We hope with change in the way things collected, this will get easier to go. So it's not particularly practical to do it every year, and we think we're following best practices advice by FCM to do the 3, the 4 years is between their 3 and 5.
So just so I'm clear, I'm not sure if I misunderstood, then the corporate also is just every 4 years?
No, Mr. Chair, the corporate's every year. Okay.
Okay, and just back to number 3, you said that you would be willing to bring us a progress report then ahead of Q4 2018. So is it Q4 2018 that you expect to come back with the? Mr.
Chair, the Phase 2 is to be completed by Q4 2019. I would imagine going on a year from now. It's probably practical to, when the new council comes in, give a progress report early in the term of the new council at the beginning of 2019, because it may also be part of my recommendation that we use as part of the briefing package to incoming council as part of the term of council strategic priorities.
Okay, thank you.
I have a feeling there must be an edict where staff aren't allowed to say the word election, so there, I'll get it out there. I believe that's what he was referring to. Next year is an election year. As we all know, there are certain rules around and traditions, or if you will, habits around new initiatives, et cetera, and timing of reporting. So Q4 next year, could have other things happening in it. But thank you for the response to that. Councillor Brockington was next. Anyone else? Let me know.
Well, Mr. Chair, I believe that, you know, even in election years, the business of this corporation needs to be well maintained and looked after by not just senior staff, but also by the people who are elected to make decisions. And I'm concerned about part 4 of the recommendation before us, which talks about coming back in Q1 of 2019. If we look at the implementation of private transportation companies, we were getting reports every 3 months, the Community and Protective Services on that. When I look at is it the SIMS or SAMS? The SAMS, the database that we had so many challenges with. It got so bad we asked for monthly updates at committee just to see how things were going with staff. And I'm not suggesting we need monthly updates, but I would like to see a update by June of 2018. I don't know if we have a meeting in June, if this committee meets in June, but I would say by the end of Q2 2018, it doesn't have to be as comprehensive as maybe what you were planning in Q1 of 2019. I just want to make sure we're on track. I want to make sure that those 33 projects that you've identified, you do have the staffing, that we've hired staffing if that motion passes at council, and that if this committee needed to intervene at all, we won't wait until Q1 2019. So would staff be able to give us a update at the end of Q2 2018?
Mr. Chair, we're prepared to bring an information presentation at that point in time to report on progress.
That's fine. So no motion necessary. That will be done.
Mr. Chair, we take it as direction.
Thank you. That's very much appreciated. Do you have the ability to put a slide up if I ask for the slide? Yep. It's the slide that looks at the graph over time, the energy, the GHG reductions.
That one.
So where are we going to be on this table, on this? Are we phase 1 moderate, phase 1 aggressive, somewhere in between?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm just asking staff to put up a slide that wasn't part of the presentation. You recall earlier we showed the Sankey diagram, which is the big loopy one, that shows where our energy comes from today versus how it's used, where it's the source of energy to what it is.
Understand this much better.
I'd like to.
Reduce the other one.
Can we get technical support, please?
It's on the screen.
We can see it. There's nobody else.
What this second slide will show when it comes up is it shows how to get to the aggressive scenario, what it would take in terms of shifting. It's actually in the report, but it shows where our sources of energy would have to come from and how we would have to reduce, diesel consumption, heating oil consumption, and the other elements too. And it's a system-wide change that's not totally within the control of the city, but we'll have to do our part to try to get to it. And rather than, giving, I think it's easier to show you what it looks like if we got to the aggressive scenario.
I guess, Mr. Willis, while we're waiting for that to be loaded, here's the angle I'm coming from. If we pass your recommendations, council adopts them as well, I think we need to know whether we're adopting a moderate course of action or a more aggressive course of action. I know there are other variables at play here, but if folks really want to, do we have to add additional resources, or are we just going to end up somewhere else? And that's why I'm looking for you to clarify.
Mr. Chair, it's a very good question from the councillor. What you're seeing in phase 1 is effectively it really focuses on energy generation. And when we say aggressive scenario, it's simply looking at primarily energy generation. We haven't looked at the conservation and efficiency components of especially transportation and buildings, which account for 90% of our GHG. So what we need to do is put those pieces together in our modeling to determine what's going to be the best path forward. Is it going to be ultimately all about generation? Probably not. It'll probably be a bit of a balance of each. So, it's really impossible to predict at this point in time. Once we have that holistic picture, once the other pathways are complete, that modeling is done, then we'll really see what's possible from the manner of trade-offs and what's important for Ottawa.
And will that only become clear once we're well into phase 2?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I understand it's like a chicken and egg scenario because municipalities set targets, not ultimately knowing how they're going to get there. Others hesitate to set a target because they don't know how to get there. And I think you really do need to set targets first, because, you know, otherwise we'll be just grinding away and not really make any commitment. Acknowledging the fact we're not 100% sure how we're going to get there, but we're going to commit as best we can through these various initiatives to meet that target, because it's 2050, it's still quite some time away. But when the chair and I were at the Renewable Energies Conference, that was a lot of the concern that municipalities had who hadn't yet established a benchmark, was they were struggling how to get there. Those who have set benchmarks said, we're not exactly sure how we're going to get there yet, but we felt it was very important to set these benchmarks and work together as a community to get there. So I get that. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from committee members? Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair. Just one of the points that came up from the delegations about climate literacy and how we can sort of do more to engage the public and residents as well, and part of the campaign of how we're moving forward with this. Have you given any thought to that and how we can sort of do more on the community education front when it comes to this? I know this came up as well when we spoke about diversion and green bin and that recently as well at committee. So I think obviously engaging the public through this is going to be a big part of it as well, in addition obviously to what we're already doing in our city facilities and buildings, which is the biggest or one of the biggest generators of our GH here. So I think that point from Ecology Ottawa I think struck me as interesting in terms of how we communicate and educate the public and have them on board as part of this plan moving forward.
Mr. Chair, it's a very good point, and we have good partners in the community who are going to help us on that. I think there are a number of things we can do. First of all, council adopting the strategy itself is step one. And once that's actually adopted through corporate communications, we can get additional information out about the strategy. We have web content and other materials we can make available that can be pushed through social media. If councillors wished to highlight this initiative as a specific area of interest, we'd be happy to assist councillors with content for some of your communications out to your communities more directly. We do work with groups like many of the others in the room. It's a long list of people who are here today. I wish I should acknowledge every single one of them who help us get the message out in terms of the work. I think there is some legitimate suggestions that are coming in from people about how to spend a bit of time talking about this and engaging groups with this. We've done a lot of consultation for phase one, a lot of consultation to a group of very committed, educated people with experience, people who've done things. I think in the next round of phase two, we need to broaden the consultation. And I think in the renewal of the official plan, starting the next term of council, we can use that process as well to kind of get the information out more. So I think we'll go back and take some of these suggestions and try it collectively at a corporate level.
And certainly in terms of simplifying the message as well and making it as relatable as possible to people in their everyday use or functioning as well, that would be helpful for residents, I think. The other point that came up too from delegations, and I apologize if it came up already because I stepped outside, but the reporting on an annual basis versus every 4 years, as well as how we measure the greenhouse gases as well. That came up from two, I think, of the delegations. Can you speak to that? Are you able to report back on an annual basis as opposed to 4 years? Does seem a lot. I'm not an expert in the measurement of that, but 1 year seems like a reasonable amount of time as opposed to 4. And in terms of the actual measures that we're using too.
Chair, as far as the emissions of this corporation, the City of Ottawa, we report annually. that does happen. The issue about collecting the data of all the different sources, public, private sector, other levels of government, is actually quite complex. Consuming was very difficult to actually do for this process because it's not readily available. And the Federation of Canadian Municipalities bench recommends that municipalities do that every 3 to 5 years. And so we've gone down the middle and recommended every 4 years for that. So that's the basis of the strategy, but we do report on our own efforts every year.
Okay, and then the kilowatt that came up as well versus
the
other.
In the actual report, you'll see we provided some information for conversion on this. It becomes a very large number that almost is beyond comprehension when you go to kilowatt hours, but I think the point's well taken, and we'll just have to find a communications way of explaining that to relate it, because I think Mr. Egerton's point is valid, that most people, when they look at their hydro bill, that's how they view it. So we'll work on that. And I should also say that Hydro Ottawa is a very important partner, more so than perhaps Hydro One, who is less accessible to us, but Hydro Ottawa, Hydro Ottawa does a lot of work on energy education as well, and we are happy to work with them to get some of the information out.
Yeah, no, and I think they do a great job in the schools as well, the various conservation, and they really target our residents at a young age, and I'm sure many of my colleagues have been with them when they go to schools and do those presentations as well, and I agree with you, Hydro Ottawa does do a great job of educating and passing that information on to students as well. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Moffat? Yep.
I just have a selfishly specific question. When Mr. Walker spoke from Birds Rapids, they've put a lot of effort into their project for several years. As you heard Councillor Chernyshchenko speak to it, it's been going on for 10 years. What can we do? I mean, it's in our report to say that we need something. In my support of Councillor McKenney's motion, a group like that doesn't need money. They're not looking for money from us. They're not looking for funding from the city at the moment, but they need time. They need someone to dedicate time to help them get through some of the things that they've struggled with. And really, they went through 3 application processes, 3, 4, and 5, and they were denied at all 3 times. And none of the denials were based on actual tangible things to do with the project. It was small clerical things, almost like they were weeded out just for the sake of weeding out. So what can we do with the current resources to help a group like that move forward? Because that's an easy win for the city, to help a group that has all the resources themselves to do it financially, not looking to us for anything financially. It's a net benefit to the City of Ottawa to have this project up and running. It doesn't actually cost anything.
Mr. Chair, there's very good points that have been raised by Mr. Moffat. Basically, the Birds Rapids is, it can work if we can get virtual net metering working. Now, the long-term energy plan for Ontario has just come out. We're still waiting on regulations on how that's supposed to work, and that's going to happen, I believe, January, I believe, is when the regulations are coming out, at which time virtual net metering will be explained as to, how it's supposed to work in the province. So they're a bit locked by the fact that who do they sell it to at this point in time. So that would open a big door for Birds Rapids project, as well as a number of the first 5 projects effectively in our work plan. If we can open that. We're going to ensure,
even without the extra resources that weren't approved today, we're going to ensure that we have the resources to help these groups seek approval or get to a point where they can actually be viable.
Mr. Chair, I think one of the things that would be useful is that I'll undertake to meet with them with a team of both economic development and environmental policy staff, and we'll try to grind down what it is that they need from the other levels of government, because we have a landowner that's federal and a regulator that's provincial, and I think we need to dig in a little bit to understand that. But I think, as I said, one of the things, if we treat this as an economic development initiative as well as a policy initiative, we can bring some different resources to bear to see if we can find a way to help them.
All right, thank you.
Any others? No, seeing none, I will ask a couple of questions and then some closing remarks, which I promise will be short. We heard from so many organizations, many of whom have been involved from the outset and have been really engaged, constructive players with the city throughout this process. Many of them offered very specific critiques. Had questions. What at this point do we do with that? Is there a mechanism? I can't imagine that in the 2.5 weeks or so before this comes to council that we're going to come out with a brand new report that incorporates everything that we heard, and yet there has to be some kind of a halfway point, if you will, or opportunity by which we can respond to why it is that some of those we can and will do, others we've looked at and aren't able to do, and some are interesting ideas but are going to take a lot longer to think through. Is there anything that we can come back with in time for council, and then afterwards, this is a living, evolving piece of work and strategy. While we do want to wrap up, finish, and approve the starting document, how do we do that sort of input?
So, Mr. Chair, what I recommend is we will go back and do a memo to council before the budget adoption or before the adoption of this strategy, and outline from the items which ones we've addressed, whether or not we have concerns with some or whether we feel some are just premature, because many of them are certainly issues that can be carried forward into phase 2 and certainly pursued at the next phase. So we'll undertake to do that and then have that information available prior to council.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that, as I am sure the people who put a lot of work into trying to be as constructive as possible and offering a lot of good technical expertise will be glad to hear. So in closing, there's a few things I want to say. I'm guilty of being the guy who had this idea way back, well, actually dates back to the 2013 election, and it wasn't my idea initially. I was hearing about cities worldwide that were committing to becoming 100% renewable by 2050. That's a goal, that's a stretch goal that was starting to momentum internationally, and I had the idea that Ottawa could and should be one of those. Politics being what it is, we were able to adopt as a council, as a strategic initiative for this term, that we would develop a renewable energy transition strategy, targets to be determined, and how to get there to be determined. It has taken a little longer than some of us wanted. It's taken a major staff reorganization, which required new people picking up for the good work that had been done before that, and really getting engaged. It has required the patience and perseverance of a lot of our community partners who have wondered if this wasn't going to be yet another case where the city or a government started something, but then it never quite came to the end. I believe here we are at a point that is both not as much or as good as I'd hoped, and yet better and more than I'd hoped. It is not that great overarching document that commits to 100% and covers every topic. On the other hand, when I compare it to other cities who made those sorts of bold announcements early on and had very few specifics about how they were going to get there, and very little data about where they were now and where they thought they could get to, we have something that's a little different here. It is grounded in a lot of important baseline data. It's grounded in a lot of conversations with the groups that are going to be needed to help us get there. That's something that I've rarely seen in other documents, but it is focusing specifically energy generation, energy supply at this point, and we acknowledge, it's part of our report, that there's some remaining key pieces of work to be done, because we acknowledged from the very outset that renewable energy transition was not about continuing to consume as much as we do now in exactly the same way, but try and replace it with renewables. It was actually going to have to be about trying to reduce consumption as much as possible, conserve, become efficient, and then make that transition. So we got our order a little differently here for reasons that have been explained, but I believe we have in front of us a very solid document, one that is inevitably going to be an evolving strategy. Nobody knows what the answers are to everything. Nobody knows what the technology will bring, what sort of promising technology won't pan out, and what sort of new solutions will suddenly come up, and what the markets will do between fuel prices and electricity prices and other levels of government. But we do know this is a critical transition the city must engage in. And as has been underlined by a lot of people, it's not just about tree hugging and showing that we're doing the right thing. It is also very much about the economy of the future, the employer of the future, being the city that people want to live in, are proud to live in, and where the companies that are doing the work, the technology, the systems, the processes, locate and see the policy backing from their government to feel there's a good connection there. And we heard that from many private sector organizations that participated in this, some of whom submitted letters. We heard the vast majority of the work plan that's included in this document can be done with existing resources in 2018. I think that's absolutely essential. It has been underlined that more money would have been nice to have, and so it's going to be essential that the city proves that it can deliver on, that we as a council can deliver on what has been promised here with our resources, and then look into 2019 and beyond how to augment that in terms of human resources, as we heard, and financial resources. That was repeated often, and I think was well received by committee members. I find it interesting that nobody was here to speak against it. There is still a myth out there, just like there's a myth that the science isn't settled on climate change. No, the science is settled. It was settled years ago, and people are just spinning you when they tell you otherwise. Similarly, when we hear that there might be opposition to this, I say if there is one small fringe element of this city that somehow doesn't understand that this is where we need to go, we just move beyond that. We know all the evidence proves that this is where we need to go, so we keep going. And that was very clear. If there was anyone opposed, they certainly weren't opposed enough that they took a couple of hours out of their day to come and tell us that, and not a single person. So that tells me something very clearly. We're doing what we know needs to be done. We heard a final point: if you're serious, show it. And that's a valid point. The dollars have to be there. The staff has to be there. We've heard that, at least in the short term, that staffing, the resources can be found, and that there is some positions in roles in various departments that will be able to accomplish this work. But I think we heard from both the public and members of this committee that they would like to see as soon as possible details of who is going to be doing what, so that we have the reassurance that that is going to happen. But on that note, I do want to thank those staff who have taken up the ball here. I think I'd like to particularly thank Andrea Flowers, who was reassigned to other work, but did some really important initial work. I want to thank Marika, who took over the project manager role here. If John Smith's here, got other jobs. I think he may actually be in a meeting that I asked him to be at right now that I can't be at. And to everyone else who is here, to Jen, to John, to Mike, and by starting to name people I'm missing some, I apologize. Many of you worked on this in bringing it here, and I thank you for that. And we already gave you direction to do some more just before we can approve this at council in a couple of weeks' time, and I know you will do your best there. And finally, to all of both the public delegations, people who came here on their own behalf, on behalf of other organizations, thank you for that. And the other 90 plus people and organizations who were part of our sounding board, came to many events, help us to set the vision, and I know many of them will be pleased to see that was not time given in vain. They'll be grateful to see this pass today, and then they will ask, we're going to go further and faster, and rightly so, because that's what we heard very clearly. So that's my wrap up. Verging on short, maybe not, but at this point then we need to vote on receiving this report. So I think we can do that on the recommendations as a whole, as opposed to one by one. I actually have to direct staff, okay. So we received Energy Evolution, Ottawa's Community Energy Transition Strategy, Phase 1, attached as Document 1. That's received. We direct staff to initiate the recommendations described in this report and summarized in Document 2. Carried. Okay, direct staff to complete Phase 2 of the Energy Evolution Strategy that will include the transportation, buildings, waste streams, and energy storage pathways in collaboration with community partners. Is that carried? And we direct staff to report back to committee and council on the status and implementation of Energy Evolution by Q1 2019, and I'm not sure if I should do it now, but we also gave direction to give us a status update by spring, early summer of this coming year, 2018, end of Q2 2018. On that, is that carried? Our work on receiving this report is done. Thank you. We have one more item, and a delegation who has sat through this entire day, because when he gave me some very interesting feedback the other night, I said, why don't you come and present to the committee next week? And he accepted to do that, and so we will try to get to you, Matthew, as soon as possible. First of all, a very short presentation from staff. Jen Brown, please. So this item is, since I didn't introduce it, Item 5, the Corporate Electric Vehicle Charging Station Policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to introduce Jen Brown beside me. She is our numbers guru in my group, and she also project managed the corporate EV policy for the city. Beside her is Mike Fletcher, again, from the Beam Group, part of our team on secondment. This has been very much a partnership between the Beam Group and my unit in planning. Given Mike's technical expertise and Jen's policy expertise, it was a good match to be able to develop this policy. So it's been very comprehensive in working with other departments, and I think we've come up with a good solution here. So take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Marika, and good afternoon, Chair and members of committee. I'm happy to be here along with my colleagues to walk you through a hopefully short presentation on the proposed corporate electric vehicle charging station policy. Thanks, Mike. So a bit of background to start. The policy supports 2 council strategic initiatives, the Air Climate Change Management Plan, as well as the previously discussed Energy Evolution Strategy. In addition, the policy supports the council-approved community-wide target to reduce Ottawa's greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. In Ottawa, emissions from the transportation sector accounts for 40% of Ottawa's total GHG emissions based on the 2012 GHG inventory. As such, the purpose of this policy is to support the use of electric vehicles through the provision of charging infrastructure on city property, as well as to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector in Ottawa. So when we talk about electric vehicles and how they charge, we're talking about any vehicle that is partially or fully powered by electricity and plugs in to recharge. This does not include power-assisted bicycles. There are 3 types of charging stations in Ottawa: Level 1, Level 2, and DC fast chargers. So Level 1 charging stations are typically your standard wall socket to which all fully electric and hybrid plug-ins come equipped to use. Level 1s are the slowest type of charge, taking 8 hours to fully charge an EV, and are typically used when owners park their cars over long periods of time, example overnight at your place of residence. The most common type of publicly available charging stations are Level 2 charging stations. There are roughly 15 Level 2 charging stations today on city property, an example of which you can find outside at City Hall on Lisgar Street. Level 2s on average take 5 hours to fully charge an EV. As such, the majority of owners charge their vehicle at home and use Level 2s to top up a charge over 1 to 2 hour periods. The fastest charging stations, The fastest type of charging stations in Ottawa are DC fast chargers, which can on average charge a car up to 80% in 30 minutes. There are currently 6 DC fast chargers publicly available on city property, all of which are owned by Electric Circuit and were paid for through the Electric Vehicle Chargers Ontario program. An example of a DC fast charger is is an example on the slide. This one is available at Ben Franklin Place. Apologies. DC fast chargers are generally located in areas for when a driver would like to go further than the radius of their at-home charging station and require a quick charge. For example, next to a major highway arterial or in areas where EV owners cannot charge at home. Some of the key recommendations of the policy include, it is recommended that all new city facilities and major expansions of city facilities be mandated to include at minimum one level 2 charging station. Capital costs for the installation of the charging station will be borne by the project budget. Level 1 and DC fast chargers are recommended to be installed on a case-by-case basis. It is also recommended that the city prioritize agreements with third-party owners to own and operate charging stations over having the city own and operate. This is due to the rapid nature EV technology is changing and avoids additional staff resources and expertise being required to operate and maintain the charging stations. And thirdly, it is recommended that the city introduce a user fee structure for all city-owned charging stations installed after December 13th, 2017. The intent of the proposed user fee structure is to cover the costs of the affected utility budget and the maintenance of the charging stations. It is similar to the existing fee structure currently being used for all charging stations owned by Electric Circuit on city property. As well, it reflects the different levels of service being offered. For example, the per-use fee is higher for DC fast chargers due to the faster level of service being offered. Under the policy, infrastructure will be responsible for ensuring that new facilities and major expansions to existing facilities meet the requirements of the policy. Day-to-day maintenance of the charging stations will be the responsibility of the department managing the site. It is also recommended that to ensure the effectiveness of the policy, that a three-year review of the policy be undertaken by economic development and long-range planning staff, as well as a periodic review to ensure that the policy is in keeping with best practices. This work will ensure that charging stations are being installed to meet future demands and that the user fee is in keeping with best practices. On behalf of the project team, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and staff would be happy to answer any questions you have on what's been proposed.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from committee members? Councillor Brockington.
Thank you for this presentation. I found it useful and informative. Why would we consider even a level 1 charger when it takes so long to charge? If I go to a library or a community center, I generally don't spend as much time there as it would take to charge my car. So why wouldn't you just recommend the DC fast chargers at all centers? It's quicker. I'm not sure what the difference in cost is, so I'd like to have you explain that for me, please.
Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. Level 1s, you're correct. They are a longer charge. So under the policy, they are not mandated. It's strictly level 2s that are being mandated. You generally more see level 1s at potentially a park and ride, where you'd be there for a longer extended period of time. In terms of why are we not outright recommending or mandating DC fast chargers, it really comes down to cost. Level 2s typically start at $5,000. DC fast chargers start at $60,000. So that there is a cost difference in the two.
He's thinking up a follow-up, but we'll move on. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question. You know, reading the policy, it says we're going to prioritize privately owned over city-owned, agreements. I'm just wondering if, and this is a bit of a flyer, but recently I had the opportunity to look at the Precise Link company's charging units. So these are, you've probably seen them. These are heads that replace the existing parking meters that we have in the city. They're made by the same company that supplies those parking meters, and they just have, you know, the head on it that goes over the top of the existing parking meter and provides for, I think it's level 2 and 3 charging capacity. And I'm wondering how that would fit in, given that I'm assuming we own those parking meters. Councillor Eggli's left, and I'm not in transportation, so I don't know if we own our parking meters or if PreciseLink operates them, but I know we get revenue from them. So I'm wondering if you've seen these beasts before and how you would see them fitting in with this policy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did see that type of arrangement at a trade show, and I think it's a good opportunity because you end up with less jewelry on a street, for one thing, other opportunities probably. That would be a question that I don't know the answer to about how back office is done, how we currently do back office on parking, you know, because we're collecting fees for the charging service. Also, if it's a level 3 like a DC fast, the particular head might be small, but somewhere in the proximity there's going to be a large transformer box and a large rectifier box that will take up some space. So just those are some details around it. But you know, the concept is interesting for what it does to avoid the use of street space.
Yeah, it seemed to be an interesting concept from, you know, and to Councillor Brockington's point over, you know, 12-hour charge. The way it was explained to me was, you know, you park your car for 30 minutes, you know, you're never going to let your car battery get down to nothing like we do with gasoline. You're simply going to top up for 30 minutes at that site and move on. And given that they were compatible with our existing parking meters in the city, it seemed like an easy win, or at least one worth investigating. So I'll leave it with you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, and my apologies, Matthew Eglin. Late enough in the day that I forgot my order. We should have asked you first to come and give your 5 minutes prior to going to questions to staff. So please do come up. You stuck it out all this time, and then I delayed you even further. But we'll give you 5.5 minutes. There.
Thank you. That's very good.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So my name is Matthew Eglin. I'm a resident of Somerset Ward. I'm an EV owner, a blogger, and an IT consultant. Before I start, I should say I've got a small conflict of interest. I'm currently under contract with OC Transpo, so some of the things we're discussing might directly impact me in the future. So yes, please put a charge for Belfast Road. That would be great. Before I disagree with almost everything in the policy, I must compliment the staff on it's a very comprehensive view of the landscape. You've covered off a lot of the items that need to be looked at, including critical things like the capacity of each of the types of charge, and I think you've done a very good job in that aspect. But I must say that, Mr. Chair, you said a few moments ago that if you're serious, show it. This policy doesn't show it. The thought of sitting here and setting a policy under the context of what we've been talking about all day, that places a tiny number of charges into the field over the next 10 years. How many buildings are we going to redo in the next 10 years? 20, maybe? It's a few $1,000s worth of infrastructure. We spent a good portion of that just sitting here. So I think we have to do something a lot more dramatic. Let's discuss what EV charging is about. Majority of EV charging takes place at home on a level 2 charger. More than 90%. What we do want to charge at work, and we also want to charge on the go. It's often called destination charging. In these sort of projects, we have to look at the levers we're operating. And the long lever that the city has to operate in this realm is workplace charging. You have a lot of employees that commute. I'm working at OC Transpo. My electric car is the only one in a giant parking lot at the moment. Destination charging does play a place for the city, but it's that workplace charging I want to focus on. As a major employer, we should really be planning to provide level 2 charging at all workplaces. And I think that's a critical policy decision that this committee can take. It has the benefit today that we would provide plug-in hybrid drivers who want to be able to go to and from over a fairly short commute on electric charge. They could do that. But more importantly, it would open up ownership of electric vehicles, pure electric vehicles, to staff on longer commutes that can't get there and back on one charge. And it would also open up EV ownership to staff who currently don't have off-street parking to be able to charge at home. Those two populations today cannot buy EVs. Today, a large number of people are considering the purchase of either a plug-in hybrid or an EV, but very few people actually go through with it, and that's because of barriers like this. Installing charging infrastructure at the workplace makes a huge difference to that decision to say, yes, actually we can do this. It's not that hard. Part of that, though, comes down to costs, and the cost of charging, one of the issues with the policy is it's internally inconsistent. It talks about a ratio of charging for charging, I don't like that phrase, but the cost of charging being about twice the cost of electricity. But the rates quoted are not in that realm. They're much, much higher because they come from the EVCO program, which is not, which charges a lot for electricity, far more, essentially about the same as gas, which doesn't work very well. So we have to look at mechanisms to bring that cost such that when you do charge, you're not paying as much as you would with gas. You need to charge people for the electricity. I do believe we should be charged at all stations, but it should be realistic. It should be maybe 20 cents a kilowatt hour, not 50 cents, which is what is typical in the EVCO program. Destination charging is somewhere where the city can play, but it's really something which the private sector is looking at to a great extent. For example, the Réunion Centre announced yesterday that they've got actually didn't announce it, it just happened. Tesla have a supercharger in the basement of the Réunion Centre now, an 8-station supercharger. It's free. Destination charges costs vary, but level 2 is free typically at shopping centres. And we can look at the sort of idea of expanding into all our parking lots, again with a reasonable cost, as being something we can do in the future. And again, a policy should be set about that. So let's look at some specific recommendations. The first thing I want to do I'd like to see this policy do is talk about its target audience. You write a policy, this policy is going to help us reach the reduction in greenhouse gases over to 2050. But what's the vector for that? Who's going to buy the electric car when I do this? And that needs to be stated. I am going to influence the purchase of an electric car in this population by doing this. And I think this is something where parking lots within the city have that nice sort of setup. I think we need to support the budgeting and planning of workplace charges in all significant workplaces within the city. We should look at the budget and plan destination charges in all significant parking lots, both park and ride and downtown. We need to focus on level 2 charging. There's been a lot of discussion today about reducing energy consumption. Level 1 charging is much less efficient than level 2, 30% less efficient. I think doing away with level 1 charging would set a good example. And if possible, we should be charging by kilowatt hour, not by time. It's not a very particularly fair way of doing business to charge by time because each vehicle is different. Engaging Hydro Ottawa to deploy the chargers may allow that charging system. It's difficult to do as a private organization. And we need to develop policies for on-street charging. I think that was my bell, wasn't it? I apologize.
Okay, I was going to give you some latitude as the only one here on this one. So
okay.
If you've got a few more recommendations, I know you've also submitted, I believe you've also submitted in writing.
I didn't yet, because I was sick of the weekend, so I didn't get a chance to do it.
Well,
I have submitted a tool to Jennifer to help with working out the real cost of particular rates of charging for charging. We need a better phrase. Fees for charging. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
If you have a few final points you wanted to make, please go ahead.
So under the larger picture, I think we need to consider electrification is happening now. We're a large fleet. The city is a large fleet. We're in a unique position to do things and move the ball forward. I was very disappointed we haven't talked about fleet electrification in this whole conversation. OC Transpo, waste collection, and bylaw in particular. There's no need for us to buy another fossil vehicle in those 3 departments. They're all available. We can just go buy a bus, buy a garbage truck, buy a car. It's easy to do. And I think we just need to, my last point is that we need to be ready for what I think is going to turn out to be a much faster conversion to electric vehicles than we think today. It's happening far faster than we're imagining. Whole cities have already gone, in China, for example. So we need to do more.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? No. Councillor McKinney? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matthew. Actually, it's to staff on something that Matthew brought up or tweaked for me, actually.
So just to be sure,
Okay.
any further questions to delegation? No. Thank you then. I guess we'll do questions to staff.
Yeah, just I was actually had meant to ask this, and it had slipped my mind until the last delegation brought it up. But on the looking for opportunities for charging stations, and Councillor Taylor brought up also interesting concept of having them sit on top of some of the pay and display infrastructure that we have, but. Is staff working, for example, we're going to rebuild Elgin Street in a couple of years, and obviously there's opportunity there to look at charging stations. I know any conversations I've had, mostly informal with Hydro, they're always interested in looking for opportunities. So is that something that, are we making sure that, whenever we're looking at redeveloping our streets, that we're laying down the fibers and that we're putting in the infrastructure necessary, whether it's something like Councillor Taylor mentioned, we still have to have that underground infrastructure. We never want to go back and redo it. I'd love to see at least 2 stations on Elgin Street. So do we talk to our own staff, and do we talk to Hydro, I guess is my question.
I think Mr. Willis will answer that question.
So, Mr. Chair, first of all, as it relates to the actual specific projects, we can talk offline about that and explore it in the individual project with infrastructure services. There is, as I talked to Mr. Conrad, the CEO of through parts of the city, there's good electrical infrastructure in place already that would support a lot of what we want to do. But there are portions of the city where the backbone system does need upgrading, and when they need to go in and upgrades, they are looking to the future with autonomous vehicles and the like that would need to upgrade it, and they do have commercial plans to do that over time as they do that. So I think it's the answer. To be more brief, is it's both. We talked to our staff about individual projects, but also continue to seek further development from Hydro Ottawa.
Any other questions? Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the rates that have been set and recommended by staff, are they meant to be revenue neutral for the utility costs and the maintenance, or are they not even revenue neutral?
They're intended to be basically revenue neutral. Recognize that the hydro rates have come down recently, but they're basically in that range. So that includes, electrical costs and some O&M, and consideration that a lot of the time of use of the chargers will be during mid-peak or on-peak electrical rates.
Okay, and so that's why, based on the delegation that we heard, they're a bit higher than what they'd like. In Quebec, I think I saw there was an article about that. They're more subsidized, so here, why are we not subsidizing them then to ensure that that revenue is neutral to maintain and to pay the bills?
That's right. I know when Electric Circuit came into Ontario, they considered the guidelines of the EVCO program, and they considered the electrical rates. And because there were also some competitors in other parts of the province starting to set up, they also considered how other people were setting their rates. So those 3 things went into the decision on.
So in the other, are there the other facilities that would provide them would be less or more than the City of Ottawa, if there's other private ones that would offer it? In Ontario,
they're comparable. In some cases, there's slightly different fee structure, like there's a flat rate connection charge and then a time-related use charge. Also, some of the DC fast chargers that got installed in other parts of the province don't deliver quite as much power. So a direct comparison, imagine a gas nozzle that's putting out the gas less slowly and you're paid by time, or you're paying by time.
I haven't seen a whole lot of them, but where are they, for example, in commercial retail, like the RioCans or the marketplaces in those kind of places, or where are they now if they're not on city property?
So quite a few hotels. We just put a list together, so quite a few hotels. They mentioned Rideau Center, other retail, so Bayshore has them. Electric Circuit, the Ontario kind of copied a little bit what they were doing in Quebec, so they're at St. Hubert barbecues and kind of some of the Quebec-based retail that we also find in Ottawa.
Okay, and then just in terms of the capital cost, it says new facilities. I assume that's any public facility, whether it's under Parks and Rec or OPL or any public facility.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms of major expansions, it kind of seems vague. What are we talking about there? Are we talking about major additions or major renovations to an existing Parks and Rec facility, or what categorizes major expansion? There's no details in terms of what would be eligible for that.
Yeah, we said 80 more parking spaces, so we related it to parking.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with the capital of the facility that's there. It's more with the parking spaces. If there's a, okay, that's interesting. Because I don't think we really do that often, do we? Where we expand. I mean, we've made some additions here and there to some.
Yeah, not too much. I think park and rides would be.
So it's really meant to target some of the newer capital projects that we'd be building in the future.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions to staff? I just have a couple to finish. If I'm mistaken, there was no public consultation on this. This was a staff-initiated report based on research and best practices of other jurisdictions. Is that right? Okay.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair. We spoke with probably a dozen different departments and got their feedback, everything from financial to legal to accessibility, to all those different components.
And although I can understand the logic for it, as we hear from one resident and EV owner in particular, but probably could have from others, I think we could have and could still benefit from the input of people who do actually own and operate electric vehicles as to what their challenges and needs are. How might we take on board everything from Mr. Eglin's formal presentations to feedback that we have had in response to media reports or may still get from this point on?
Mr. Chair, there were consultations with EVCO, the electric vehicle chargers.
Yeah, there's two EVCOs, right? The Electric Vehicles of Ottawa and then the
Ontario
program, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
So with the Ottawa owners, there were some. Okay. At this point, where are we at? Similar to with Energy Evolution, we get useful, constructive feedback. I would hate to think that, no, sorry, the report's done, we'll implement it, and then maybe in the future revisit it. Is there an opportunity between now and council to look carefully at some of what we're hearing and possibly tweak or next steps where that sort of feedback could be integrated in the near future?
We're certainly open to looking at possibilities of tweaking it. Also, this is an untried policy. Outside of Vancouver, who's just developed a strategy for corporate EV policy, we're kind of the first in Canada to do this. We have set up a 3-year review of this policy to see, is it working, is it not? And we're continually monitoring it as well. And if things need to be tweaked, there is that opportunity to do so, to make minor changes here and there with delegated authority from the GM.
That being the case, and with this whole area evolving so rapidly, I think a 3-year period is far too long. I would actually want to revisit it within the year to see how well it's working and whether there is that something we can give as direction, or would that require a motion?
Mr. Chair, we're happy to take it as direction. I think you made a comment that, even since we started the process of writing this policy, the world's changed with major automotive manufacturers announcing they're moving into this sector in a big way. So notwithstanding that we recommended 3 years for a full policy review, I think at least a check-in with committee in a year is reasonable.
Well, thank you. If you can take that as direction, I think that would be very helpful. As you say, things are happening so quickly in this area. And also, between now and council, if there is anything in Mr. Eglin's feedback or any else that we've received where we realize that, let's get it as right as we can, prove it at council, as opposed to just deferring for a year or something that seemed to be very helpful. I think that would be great. All right, on that then, I guess we're receiving this report, is that right? So, received? Okay, which brings us to the end of our agenda. No in-camera items, the IPDs we've already received. Any notices of motions? I haven't seen any, but okay. Apparently we need to formalize that a little differently. The report recommendation that Environment and Climate Protection Committee recommend Council approve the corporate electric vehicle charging station policy attached as document 1. Is that received? Carried. Thank you. Carried. All right. No notice of motions. Any inquiries? I'm not aware of any. Other business? Seeing none, I move adjournment. Carried. Thank you, everyone.